Good afternoon out there, our Spirit Plant Medicine world, Conscious Living Network, and just the Facebook Live world out there in general. Today, it's a beautiful day here in Vancouver. It's a fall day. I'm here with my friend and associate and partner with the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, Stephen Gray. And we have a special guest today to talk about the conference. He's going to be one of our presenters, Bruce Sanguin. Now, Bruce is a psychotherapist who lives on the local Pacific Northwest Island here in British Columbia with his wife and his Mia and his dog Koa. Formerly, he was a minister in the United Church of Canada. He's written a number of books in the area of evolutionary spirituality. His clients travel to visit him for his sessions, and he does sessions by Skype and a number of different things. And, from a pastor with his experience in psychedelic and psychotherapy and finding love and, just reading his book has been pretty powerful for me. So I want to introduce Bruce, and maybe Bruce, you can start by telling our viewers and anybody who might be watching this at any point a little bit about who you are and your story and kind of what brought you into, the shifts and changes and experiences you've had.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Marc. And it's really good to be with you. Hello, Stephen. It's great to be with you. And I'm really honored to be in this conversation with you. So looking forward to it. Yeah, so as the subtitle of my book suggests, it's called Dismantled: How Love and Psychedelics Broke a Clergyman Apart and Put Him Back Together.
Great title,
really,
by the way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Title and subtitle, by the way, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that was my experience. It was a complete dismantling of what I thought of as my personality, and also a dismantling, literally took the mantle of my clergy self off, and went through a process of having to discover, who was this being underneath all of that public presentation of self. So it was quite interesting. And one of the ways to talk about this is that, in response to your question, is that shortly after leaving my marriage and just feeling like I wasn't fulfilled, I subsequently did find a woman whom I regard as my soulmate, and we married and live here together on our island. And what was surprising to me in the context of actually having found this person that I hold as my soulmate is that all of this shadow material, all of this, began to surface in the context of this intimacy that was deeper than any I had known before. And so you'd think it would be all bliss, but it wasn't. I had all kinds of feelings of from rage to hatred to feeling like she was attacking me to, looking back after those episodes, there was no basis in reality. So the question then became, what was this that was going on underneath my personality that was actually actively sabotaging this enormous love that I had found and that had found me? And so I needed strong medicine in the context of this love. And so then I, the way that happens in life, the universe started organizing around sort of opening me to what was out there in terms of particularly ayahuasca ceremonies, and then subsequently psychedelic psychotherapy. And thus began the great dismantling of Bruce Sanguin.
Good. Had you done psychedelics before this? And this happened after you'd left the ministry, is that correct?
Yeah, it happened after I'd left the ministry. I hadn't really even ever considered this. It was almost as if the energetic field of Christianity or the church didn't even allow it to enter my consciousness. I had read about Aldous Huxley and some of these early experimenters, and of course, what happened in the '60s with the eruption of LSD, etc. But I never seriously considered myself taking these substances, and so it was with some trepidation. I ended up at my first ayahuasca ceremony I was still clergyman technically. I had taken early retirement, but I was still on the rolls, and still a Christian minister, and seeing life to some extent through the symbols and metaphors of that lineage.
And so, did you have any was there an inner conflict in terms of that, your ministerial beliefs to when you went to sit with ayahuasca and start working with the medicines?
There wasn't a lot of, by that time, I would say I was on my way out. The Christianity that I subscribed to was what some call progressive. And that is that you take the Bible seriously, you don't take it literally, you're gay and lesbian and transsexual friendly, you're into social justice. So it wasn't a hugely dogmatic form of Christianity. And yet, although there was all this liberal milieu, in ways that even that form of Christianity doesn't realize, it subscribed to a worldview that to a great extent eliminated, for example, this the worldview of our indigenous friends, the whole interior dimension that is inhabited by other beings and nuanced dimensions that are virtually invisible to the Christian worldview. And it was I was opened up in the experience of these sacramental medicines, I would call them, to this other realm.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So let's get into that a little bit. I'd like to start with a Bruce Sanguin quote that I pulled out of the book, and then maybe using that as a starting point, if that makes sense, you could go into what you called your deep dive with ayahuasca, where you did some 60 or so ceremonies over 4 years. So the quote that I pulled out, well, basically part of this is the quote, part of this is summarized. But you'd written that what gets labeled as normal and successful is, and here's the quote, an alarmingly degraded expression of what it means to be human. That's a pretty strong statement. So could you take off from there?
Sure. Yeah, of course, what I discovered in my own journey of being dismantled was that I was like the poster boy for the high-functioning, broken-hearted population out there, because I was super successful. I'd written all these books. Everyone wanted to be with me. I was a minister. All the churches I had served, we were successful. The congregations were thriving. I was, a top-level athlete, and so that's why I say I appeared normal to any observer, and not only normal but high-functioning. And then through the medicines, whether in the context of psychotherapy, psychedelic psychotherapy, or the ayahuasca experience, or other medicines even, which I talk less about, that persona of the high-functioning, successful person, human being, came off, and I discovered the depths of my brokenheartedness. And at the same time, the heights of ecstasy that I was taken into transcendent realms from which I realized my deep interconnectedness and unity with all that is. And I had known that intellectually, but I was in it, in the medicine. But it's like the medicine took me to that transcendent place. And then a lot of it was about just going deep into my own suffering that I was unconscious that even existed. And so it was about becoming acquainted with my own broken heart and the ways in which my brokenheartedness had shaped my personality and my orientation in the ordinary realm, that we're all needing to move and live and have our being in. So, and if you had asked me before I started on this medicine, if I was walking around with a broken heart, I would have laughed. I literally, there were other people who picked up psych that kind of on an energetic level, there was a kind of a sadness about me. But when they would tell me this, I'd just go, well, I don't know, I'm pretty happy. I'm well adjusted. Things seem to be going okay. And then came the devastation of the awareness of how I shaped my personality in response to early trauma in my life.
Yeah, and that's something I found fascinating. Like in your book and just in the introduction, you had me riveted when you were, part of those when you were talking about being introduced to transcendental meditation, and then being, that when your mother took you in and then you gave your life to Jesus kind of a thing. And then as you defined that realization at one time where that decision really came from. Yeah. And what I was really able to do was identify, because as you were telling your story, I'm going back into my life and into my childhood where, I can identify with what you're saying. You think you're great, but you start looking in and peeling back the layers. And there's so many people out there like that today that can identify. And even if they haven't had, serious trauma, it's still there. And it's that, that, need for acceptance, love, and this massive fear of rejection.
Yeah. Yeah. I really resonate with that, Marc. And, it certainly is my own personal experience that I was, as I said, completely unaware of how this trauma shaped my life, and even shaped, as you alluded to, my decision to go into ministry out of an unconscious need to please my mother. That, as I said, the inner toddler was in on that decision, veering me away from transcendental meditation and all things Eastern into this acceptable form of religion.
Yeah. Otto Wong called it. No, go ahead.
Well, and
I was just going to say. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Steve. No, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was just going to say Otto Wong called it the false or provisional personality. That we try to cobble this together to survive in the world.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, and of course, Alice Miller talks about it as the false self or the adapted self.
Yeah.
And it's formed of what I just call these. I was in an ayahuasca ceremony, and the medicine was showing me what happened to me and how my heart got broken. Mm-hmm. And while I was in the medicine, I was still in denial, and I was trying to repress this, and I was trying to justify it and legitimize it, go, well, my mother was overwhelmed, and, it was true, all of that. And yet the medicine stopped me, and across the screen of my consciousness were written in neon lights, failure to love. And it was like the medicine was saying, just face it. You'll be okay. Just let it in. You just didn't get what you needed. And then with that, I saw immediately, like in a flash, how in the medicine, what happens is that you see in an instant the way you structured your entire personality, this compensated self, in order to survive. And at the end of this vision of that, I saw exactly what I had done. The words came to me, oh my God, 58 years of life, my life has not been my own. It's like my life has not been my own, and I didn't even notice it. I didn't know it. So, Yeah.
You know, a lot of people that take ayahuasca, even, you know, numerous times over years, don't, in my observation and experience, don't necessarily go back into childhood trauma and so on like that. Would you say that, you know, to heal properly, everybody, pretty much everybody, I mean, not, you know, 100% necessarily, but pretty much everybody needs to uncover material from their past? To me, it's an important question that I kind of struggle with, because, you know, I sometimes wonder, is there just a way in which you can just, you know, open, relax, and allow energies to move through you without actually necessarily uncovering? And I'm just going to say a wee bit more to elaborate on that question before I turn it over to you. I don't know how to put it exactly, but I used to study with Chogyam Trungpa, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher.
Right.
And, you know, he and I think other Buddhist teachers talk about how you can't really unravel everything from your past anyway, because it goes back hundreds of lifetimes, and there's so many things that traumatized you, you know. So it's more about just, you know, learning how to surrender and how to be in the now. So is that something you can make an answer out of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Stephen. And you know, like you say, we all have trouble, you know, trauma. Maybe there's 1% of the population that hasn't experienced these failures of love and sort of is able to move in life without that kind of sabotaging energy that comes from unconscious trauma. I don't know, and I'm not saying that, you know, obviously my path is my particular path, and for whatever reasons, I was taken to this place. Maybe it's because I wanted to, live into this vocation of being a psychotherapist. So I needed to have the experience of complete brokenness in order to experience compassion for my clients. That's a possibility. And is it possible, for example, to lead a life of meditation, be completely in the now in such a way that your karma from the past is cleared up and you experience sort of a new creation moment by moment? I suspect that it is for some.
Yeah.
You know, I know people have had that experience, and I've had the experience on 5-MeO DMT where I really got in the experience that my karma was being cleared up right there and then. And I opened my eyes and I said, everything's new now and now and now. And this is what it feels like to live in an unconditioned way that is unconditioned by the past. And
exactly.
So I tasted into it, Stephen. I tasted into it. And for me, for whatever reason, it's been important to have this experience because I think for me personally, I had to come back down to earth.
Yeah.
I was living with my energies way up in my head and sort of in trying to be in the divine energies. And in order to get my feet on the ground and sort of inhabit this earthly existence and do what I was here to do, I needed to get real. And getting real meant facing the truth of my experience, and that it was not about being good, it was about being true. Whereas the false self is oriented completely around, you know, for survival reasons, what do I need to do to be seen as a good person, to, you know, to be liked, to be loved, you know. This for me was an experience coming into the truth of reality and realizing that I could undergo that and survive, which I didn't know. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question. You know?
I think that's beautiful. A couple of things I want to say about that, or kind of lead back to you with. And one is, I suspect your intuition or suspicion that it was because of the work you intended to do that you, in part, were taken there or shown those things. Because I found in my own experience, and I believe that you know, when you have projects and passions and so on of things you're working on, the spirits of the medicines, or just, you know, whatever you want to call it, your guardian angels or anything, seem to know what to put in your path. Yeah. So then, but the other aspect, the other side of this question that I'd asked earlier about, how much do you need to uncover the past? The sort of the opposite side of that coin is the danger of spiritual bypassing, which it's just important theme for you. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And spiritual bypassing. It's interesting that Robert Augustus, what is that his name? Masters, Bob Masters. He's written a book about spiritual.
Robert Masters. Yeah.
And he himself has been accused by some of his followers of actually being the master of spiritual bypassing. And there's a lot of stories coming out about the cult nature of what he was doing. So this is a tricky one in that it's really possible to, what I just call a flight to transcendence, which is the avoidance of our suffering by flying upwards into our head and upwards into the divine energies, and in the process bypassing the suffering that is ours to suffer. In other words, it's a refusal to undergo reality. And sometimes this refusal it's always unconscious, but sometimes it takes the form of, there are various strategies. One is a flight to unity, where you hear in the New Age circles, we're all one. And of course, there's a truth to this, but it's important to realize that it can also be a strategy, because the original flight to unity was in response to a kind of hostile environment where you realize that you had to succumb, make huge compromises of your own sovereignty in order not to be destroyed as a child. And so what you did was you created a kind of false unity with your mother, your father, with your family, precisely because the sovereignty of you as an individual self couldn't be honored. And so when religion comes along, any kind of religion, even Eastern religions, and talks about, we're all one, and we, like non-duality, etc. It's possible just to reinforce that original trauma by taking this flight up to a kind of metaphysical unity with all that is. Mm-hmm. So it's critical on this psychological to include the psychological path. I think the psychological path being a reclamation of your own sovereign dignity as an individual, and then connect into the radical unity of all that is from that sovereign place. And beautiful. I think, that's a distinction. The other thing that happens with a lot of religions is you take the false self that you created in order to survive, and you make virtues out of it, which just cements in the false self. So, for example, your inability to take a stand out of your sovereign dignity and to be differentiated from the person or the group that you're in conversation with or that you're part of, is called somehow humility, or so you make a virtue out of that, or you call it spiritual detachment or something. So that's another strategy that's used. A
lot of Christian religions, in a sense, put the devil outside of the whole thing. Isn't that a kind of spiritual bypassing as well? It's like they disown the devil somehow. We're the good people.
Nicely put, Stephen. Because then, of course, you disown responsibility
for your dark side,
for your rage and for your hatred and for your othering others and turning them into strangers, and for your sexual proclivities that may be leaking all over the place. Well, that's the devil,
Of course.
And so the more you repress the devil, of course, the more those unconscious energies can possess you.
Yeah, that's his food.
Yeah, that's the food.
Yeah. So how, you're working in this, psychedelic psychotherapy and so on, and integration, and how common would you say, just at a guess, is spiritual bypassing in the psychedelic medicine communities?
Well, it's hard to stand there and be, like the one who, but just in ayahuasca ceremonies, I would say that there's a fair bit of it with people who return again and again, looking for the transcendent vision, looking for the unity with God, but keep coming back because, my bias is that the medicine is actually wanting to take them downward into their broken heartedness. But what people come with is a preference for, ecstasy and bliss and nirvana, and that's what's being sought out. But the real gold, of course, as Buddhists have always known, is back here on earth doing what you're here to do. And the bodhisattva return from nirvana to be part of the healing and of the world. So, there's a lot of it going on. I'm not here to sit in judgment and make decisions about who's doing it, but I see a lot of it.
So, a couple of questions I have, and one, you say it in your book, and we hear it from, many of these great teachers we've had a chance to speak with. And first off, we say, this kind of therapy and work is not for everybody, right? So my one question is who is it for? And then, my next question is, how does one choose a medicine if they feel it's for them?
Yeah, good questions. I'd be interested in your take on this too. Well, that old expression, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Mm-hmm. And I really felt that I was ready, and suddenly these opportunities to do these ceremonies made themselves available. And then that opened up as well into supplementing that with psychedelic psychotherapy with somebody who lived close by and who was a genuine guide and who I trusted deeply. So, I would say that, for example, there is some criteria, and that is that if you're currently on antipsychotic, pharmacological medicines of various kinds for depression or schizophrenia, probably these aren't the best. You need to come off those medicines with the care and attention of a trained professional before you do these medicines. If you're already of the kind of personality that feels a bit fragmented or split off, or there needs to be a certain amount of caution. I would say if you're actively addicted, and haven't started coming off those medicines, alcoholic, or booze, or I think it'd be wise to start the process of trying to come off of those. And I know, for example, that in the realm of iboga, there are protocols being developed by people that I know that actually will administer the medicine to help them come off the opiate addiction, for example, first. So I think there's room to play in here, but there are some precautions necessary. Mm-hmm. My teacher, Andrew Feldmar, said that he'd be reluctant to work with someone who feels that the weight of the world is upon their shoulders, that feel too much responsibility for the world, and under that kind of pressure, these medicines can just be a little too much. And of course, this fits with this conversation about trauma, because always when a little one, or our own little one, has experienced that this other mother, father is not able to be for us, we assume too much responsibility, and we start asking the question, what do I need to do to parent you so that you can take care of me? How do you need me to be? I'll be more kind, I'll be less demanding, I'll be, whatever it takes to be for you. And of course, when you start taking that on, it's too much responsibility. And it's the source of deep shame that too much is being asked of you and you're inadequate to the task. And in that sense of inadequacy, you feel deep shame. So that's another criteria that I hold if I'm talking to someone and they just feel like the weight of the world is absolutely on their shoulders, it's all too much, I'll be cautious.
What? So you work, you do integration therapy with people, correct? Integration, I think, as I understand it, with you anyway, is for people who have been doing the medicines. Yeah. So what does that involve? Why do people need what is integration for those people who don't really know the concept? And can you say something about how you work with those people and so on?
Sure. Yeah. So I do both integration with people after they've had their psychedelic experience. And I will also sit with them during, as they are in their medicine of choice. So people will make pilgrimages to the island. I'll do pre-sessions with them, 2 or 3 hours, just to let them kind of know the terrain, find out what their challenges are in life, build trust between the two of us, because this is critical when people are actually in the medicine. And then I'll sit with them taking the medicine of their choice, and then follow up with sessions afterwards to help with specifically the integration process. Because the experience in the medicine, as you probably know, is profound. And at one level, it's just hard to hold on to what happened to you. And then ordinary consciousness kind of comes in and reduces the experience. But if there was someone there with you, you can help them both remember what was going on and then help them to look at how what was going on applies to the challenges that they brought to the experience. And integrating what happened in the medicine with the real life challenges is what's critical. And that requires time and it requires patience. It just simply doesn't happen all at once.
So that's a talk therapy process primarily at that point?
It's a talk therapy process. I'll use body-oriented techniques to continue to get at the underlying feelings so that people can get into their bodies with this as well. But a lot of it is just helping them come to insight about what the experience means for their life, and then how do they integrate that day by day, moment by moment into their intimate relationships, into their work relationships, and to how they're orienting in the world.
Yeah, that reminds me of, did you ever see TJ Dawes' one-man show Medicine that was around town?
I heard about it. I didn't see it though. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, it was really good. But the last, I don't know, third of it or so was him talking about how he went and did one of these, 6-day long, residential things with Ronan and Gabor Mate. And
Right.
so Ronan conducted the ayahuasca ceremonies, and the next day, Gabor gathered everybody back in the yurt and basically stuck his claws into them and wouldn't let go until he felt that they'd had that kind of insight. And TJ in his play talks about how he didn't think he really learned anything from that first night, and he was sort of talking around it or whatever, and Gabor just relentlessly kept asking him questions. Yeah, what about this? What about this? And eventually, he'd go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, now I see what I was working with last night. Yeah.
Well, it just goes to show the importance of integration. And in the year that I've been, working within the community, it's the one thing that I'm seeing in every meeting and every gathering, and it's really, it's a buzzword in the medicine world now because it's so important. People are having these experiences, and then they walk out of a ceremony for a weekend or a session or whatever it may be, and they don't kind of do that work to go and really look at their experience and what it really means. And then they're lost because they can't talk, like Bruce, you were saying, you look at how you integrate it with your family, your friends, your work and things. People come out of these experiences, and I've heard it many times, they have no one to talk to.
Yeah.
And then it creates another level of what they self-describe, as kind of going crazy, or they think they're crazy, or whatever's going on, because they walked out of it and haven't continued to kind of do the work.
But even if you are doing the inner work, Bruce, is it not the case where, it's such a, if you're in a community in the Amazon and you do this medicine, you're stepping back out into a community that has a cosmology that supports that. Whereas even so in our culture, even if you're doing the inner work, you're still stepping out into a culture that's so radically different. You've seen that as a problem with people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
People, actually, what happens in the medicine is your soul comes back online. And we live in a culture, in social, political, and economic system that, frankly, doesn't have a lot of space for soul. For the intensity of the vocation of soul that, like we each come in, I think, and I've experienced with a particular task to do that's aligned with what we came in for, what this incarnation was about. But you're right, Stephen, it takes place in a world that just doesn't create a lot of space for that. And it's all about functioning in the workplace. It's all about career. It's all about safety and security. And we never actually have time for the soul. And just another thing, Marc, I'll follow up with your brilliant observations a moment ago, is that, the medicines are wonderful. Absolutely. But it's really important, I think, to realize that all of our heartbreak, all of our woundedness happened in the context of relationship. I also believe that our healing happens in the context of relationship as well. So this is why psychedelic psychotherapy, because why this is so important is that it's in the context of a relationship that we learned either to trust reality, that the universe is for us, or we learn to fundamentally distrust it. And if we did that, basically our orientation to the world is to keep it out, to reality. And so it's only in the context of a relationship that we can realize, oh, okay, I was hurt in that relationship, but here's another human being that I can relax with, that I can breathe with, whom I can trust. And, in the psychotherapeutic process, the moment you relax with another human being, the moment you trust, the moment you surrender, the moment you realize that this person isn't going to hurt me when I let my guard down, is the moment therapy's over.
What are the differences between psychedelic psychotherapy and doing a medicine with a sitter, as has been proposed and often done, described by people like Jim Fadiman in his book, and the whole Secret Chief and that whole tradition where they really just they didn't call it psychedelic psychotherapy. The sitter was just there to create a safe container for the person to do their own work.
Yeah, well, I would approach it, in my experience, a little bit differently, because when you're sitting with another human being and you make a choice to be fully present to what, yes, it may be a deep internal experience, but your job there is to hold space. And that's not nothing. That means that you're actually entering into the consciousness of what they're going through. And when they come out of that interior space and orient to the outer world and to you with whatever they're bringing from that world, the sitter, it really helps if the sitter knows a little bit of the terrain that they've brought back with them, because and so what you say, although you don't say much, but what you say will be congruent and aligned and deepen their experience, rather than out of alignment with what's said. Because the moment you say something as a sitter from your egoic consciousness, they know it immediately. They just go, this guy is not even with me, right?
Yeah.
They just pick. So you got to be super present for the 4 or 5 hours that you're there. And if you're not present, everything is known on the medicine. Now,
so
that's true in regular psychotherapy as well. But my experience is, as a psychotherapist, you're contending more with the defenses, the defense structure of your clients, and you're kind of doing, jujitsu with their defenses. In the medicine, that's less present. They're opened up. You're dealing with their heart, the vulnerability of their heart.
So, there already is, and there's going to be a lot more, both psychedelic psychotherapy and this modality where we're, talking about just a person functioning as a sitter. So what would you say in a general way would be the kind of minimum qualifications that an effective sitter should have? Not necessarily pretending to be a therapist, but just a good sitter.
Well, a good sitter, I think, things come to mind like they've suffered what's theirs to suffer. In other words, they know the terrain of brokenheartedness and have experienced deep compassion for themselves in that brokenness. To the extent that compassion has come back online for ourselves, and we shouldn't assume that we know what self-compassion means. I didn't. To the extent that we do know that, we can be present with another person. I would say it's really important that you know the difference between your own egoic consciousness, which often results in the need to insert yourself and insert your agenda into their journey. And I would say,
well said.
As much as possible, leave your ego, park your ego at the door, trust the medicine, trust this other person. And because it's your ego that feels like it needs to insert itself in somebody else's process, and it always gets in the way. A sitter, in my opinion as well, needs to have done the medicine, him or herself.
Of course.
It seems obvious, but I wouldn't feel safe doing this with someone who hasn't been there. Obviously somebody needs to be like a great listener who's seriously curious and refuses to overlay the template of their own biases and prejudices on whoever they're sitting with. And that takes a surprising amount of work on oneself.
So what are some of the differences and maybe similarities, but also differences between that kind of work, psychedelic psychotherapy, sitter sort of style, and something like a group ceremony with ayahuasca, where you're not necessarily getting any personal attention other than, maybe there's a sharing session, maybe there isn't at the end, maybe there's one in the morning, maybe there isn't. So there's not necessarily anybody to talk about it with at the time or to help you unravel it as the power of the medicine winds down. So, what are the issues around that, and what makes for an effective ceremony that way, in that style?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. That's a great question. Because I would say for me, the psychedelic psychotherapy sessions really focused on the dynamics of the relationship between me and my therapist. And it's there that I rediscovered vulnerability and trust, and I let down into the depths of my own heartbreak. In the ayahuasca ceremonies, and there are different styles of leadership here too. And the ones that I experienced, it's more about self-reliance. There will be assistants coming around if you get in trouble, but they're not there to hold you, for example. They're not even there to touch you. They're certainly not there to give you a hug. And there's, in my experience, there's a lot of focus on being able to witness whatever you're going through from a meditative state, but not expecting to be heard or listened to, and that the healing dynamic's not going to come through a relationship. So whereas in psychedelic psychotherapy and in ordinary psychotherapy, the healing is basically going to come through the relationship. So it's my bias. I had great benefit in all those ayahuasca ceremonies. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I got to a place where I was in a Maloca in Mexico for 9 straight sessions, and I was going into the heart of my sorrow. I mean, I had never experienced this before. I got to the point where I was actually identifying with like a 1.5-year-old or a 2-year-old. So every time somebody walked by to go to the washroom or something, I thought they were coming to pick me up. As a little kid, right?
Did you think they were going to change your diapers?
I thought they might change my diaper, you know. But then they walked right on by, and I was devastated every time, you know, like and then, you know, so I had to deal with that myself. I had to sort of put on a witnessing conscience and say, oh, okay, here's what's going on. I'm a toddler. I formed a belief that someone's coming to rescue me, but nobody is coming to rescue me. Heartbreak, go back into that witnessing consciousness, but deal with it all myself. In the context of psychedelic psychotherapy, my therapist would actually, for example, hold me and comfort me. And I would have a different experience of that profound need, except for it would be met this time. Both important experiences, just coming at it differently.
Yeah, I think the way you were talking about it in the ayahuasca ceremony, for me, because I've had similar experiences, is part of that is that you can just be yourself and be whatever you are in that container, in that environment. First time I ever did a peyote ceremony with the Native American church people, my mother had just died 3 days before that. And as the night wore on, I just went deeper and deeper into grief. And eventually, I don't think I've ever had such a complete and deep experience of grief in my life. And it lasted for hours, and I was just weeping constantly. And, you know, there's 30, 40 people in the teepee, and they're singing songs and all that, and they just ignored me, you know. And like nobody came over and, you know, are you all right or anything like that, you know. And at a certain point I thought, hey, it's okay. They don't really care. They've all seen all kinds of different pain, you know, and I can just be with my experience, you know. And that was really, really powerful. I just felt like I went right to the bottom of the well, and there wasn't a single shred of grief that wasn't, you know, released in that experience.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. What about the different medicines themselves? Like, do they, you know, like say ayahuasca, peyote, psilocybin, iboga, huachuma,
You're asking
LSD?
my question, Stephen.
Oh, well, do you want to ask it instead? I mean,
I was thinking the exact same thing at the same time.
Do they have different, would you say different roles to play to some extent?
Yeah, I think that they do, and they have different qualities. And you know, I mean, I haven't personally experienced the whole panoply of these medicines. You know, the sessions I did were with a combination of MDMA and LSD together, and ayahuasca, and experiences with 5-MeO-DMT, and then some psilocybin, and I think each one is there are subtle differences. I've never actually sat down and made a list of those differences, but my experience with ayahuasca, for example, is that in your visions, you're taken deep into an indigenous worldview, and traditional values within you know, that worldview come online. For example, you know, I'm a postmodernist guy, you know, and so my value system is relativistic. There are no absolutes. But in the medicine there, I experienced that, well, actually, there's good and there's evil. There's right and there's wrong. There's masculine, there's feminine. And whereas the sort of the postmodern philosophical thing is, well, these are all sort of human constructs. But so I'd experienced indigenous warriors, for example, coming to me and initiating me into the order of the pure heart.
Wow.
And owl feathers covering me, and serpents coming to guide me. And so it was very much an indigenosity, and that's been one of my transformations. As a Christian minister, and I was into integral philosophy, and in some ways it regarded indigenosity as kind of a lower on the hierarchy. But I've discovered the brilliance and the sophistication and the completeness of an indigenous worldview. So that came online in these plant medicines. And then I would say with LSD, it wasn't so much about that. It just did what a good psychedelic does, which is the revealing of the heart and mind, psychedelia, to uncover, to reveal. And that took me into my trauma. 5-MeO-DMT took me to, into the heavens. It just, I blasted off, and it wasn't a grounded experience at all. Mushrooms, on the other hand, tend to be very grounding for me. Like it takes me into, along with ayahuasca, mushrooms take me into sort of ancestral awareness of the lineage of my ancestors. So, it would be possible to become sophisticated enough to say, well, I want to experience the ancestors. And if I did, I would go with ayahuasca or mushrooms. If I wanted to go into my trauma, I might choose LSD. And I imagine this varies for different people as well, but that's my experience.
That's beautiful. Do you have any relationship with cannabis as a spiritual medicine?
Just through you.
So let me ask you this, Bruce. Do you have a particular favorite?
I really love MDMA, just because it's so heart opening. Yeah. And I love being in love.
Yeah.
I'm in love with everything when I'm in MDMA. Although I've also gone to traumatic places there, but
really,
effectively, it's even with that, I've gone to trauma. But MDMA is right up there. Mushrooms have come on for me lately. Really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the experience I had with cannabis too. I was never a recreational user of cannabis, and the quality and strength of it apparently has changed dramatically in the last 30 years, because I did a ceremony right, with someone here present, and I was,
and it wasn't me,
and it was, and I was just gone. You're playing your gongs and your music, and I became the music. There was no me. I was.
That's the intention.
Well, and I was like, my ego dissolved completely.
Amazing.
I want to add to that is, as a recreational cannabis user for most of my life, one of the things when I sat with ayahuasca was I thought I had to stop. I was smoking too much. And part of it was correct, because the message I got was about respecting it, honoring it, and looking at it from a different context. And then I meet Mr. Stephen Gray. And, the difference that it makes when you use it as a spiritual ally, in ceremony. And I think that that's an important part to mention, is in using, any of these medicines, the importance of the ceremony behind that of what you're doing, because there's something happening when the shamans are singing the icaros, and the music and the quiet and the meditation and all the different aspects that come through is different than just doing something for fun.
Exactly. I mean, I was given 4 practices in like my spiritual practice. This intelligence said to me, "Here are your practices, Bruce. Wow. Be in reverence, awe, and gratitude. Move at the pace of life," which is number 2, which means for me, slow way the hell down.
Everybody.
Yeah. The third
you guys
was
talking to me?
Especially you.
The third was treat everyone who comes into your teepee as the prince and princesses that they are. So it was about radical hospitality. And the fourth one was leave the rest to me.
Let go and let God.
Radical surrender.
I love the radical. What did you just call that? Radical
surrender.
Yeah, the one before that about
friendship.
One about welcoming everyone that comes into
Yeah.
your teepee as the prince and princesses that they are. Radical
Yeah.
hospitality.
Yeah, radical
Yeah,
hospitality.
beautiful.
I like
Yeah.
it.
Because
I like
people forget, mostly we forget how beautiful we are. Mostly we forget how the radiance that we brought with us into this incarnation. And hospitality has the impact of reflecting back to people that they're worthy of being treated with such dignity and respect as
Well,
they are being.
Our mission throughout this whole conference is to be radical hosts and to have radical hospitality, as well as the VIP after event dinner party. You know, the goal is
Nice.
to, you know, show up the way we like to show up in conscious living and really show that, you know, radical hosting and hospitality for you and all the speakers, all the guests, everybody who makes it happen, and anybody who kind of really steps into our world. So,
Yeah, beautiful vision. That's a beautiful vision.
well, we just want everybody to have a good time. We want everybody to be loved and, you know, be loved and, you know, leave our stuff at the door, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
They, I read that the Maya of Guatemala, anyway, have their way of saying hello is I think it's something like "in la catch," which means "I am another you."
Beautiful.
Yeah. So maybe one last question. I don't know if you've even, this is on your radar particularly, it's, you know, maybe beyond your purvey to some extent, but have you thought much about where we're going with the development of these medicines and use in the culture?
Great question, Stephen.
Yeah, I would say my contribution there would be that, you know, I'm happy that so much of the research and the research money is going into sort of the most traumatized demographics, like returning veterans, people who are living and dying with cancer, those who are really struggling with high levels of anxiety. And that's great. It is as it should be. On the other hand, I don't want to ghettoize these medicines in a sense so that only our psychiatrists and psychologists can be the dispensers of them. And I think there's a bit of a danger in that because, you know, there's this whole demographic of which I am the poster boy that I just call the high functioning, brokenhearted out there who need this medicine. And you know, my dream is that, you know, our authorities will wake up somehow to the healing power of this medicine. It makes no sense that this stuff is illegal while alcohol, which kills and ruins the lives of millions of people, is a legal drug. So I'm passionate about, you know, doing what I can to make this available, not just to the most traumatized populations, and it needs to be available to them, absolutely, but to people like me, you know, and you, and people who might not even be aware that they're walking around, you know, with all this heartbreak. So
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I'm satisfied with this. I think it's, you know, I mean, if you have more questions, Marc, fire away. But for me, I'm delighted, Bruce. You know, really appreciate your insights. And one of the things that not a lot of people do is use themselves as the kind of the guinea pig in a sense, in the same way, and reveal that so openly. So I really appreciate that. Yeah.
I'm with you there, Stephen, and I just appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday afternoon, on a long weekend as well, Bruce, to, you know, share your story, share your passion, and then again, you know, being part of the conference coming up in like 29 days from now. So just, you know, it's a pleasure and an honor to meet you, to speak with you, to serve with you. And I'm just, you know, I feel blessed every day that I'm part of the work that we're doing, because, you know, we get to share such a powerful message, and I'm just an agent for change, and I want to see people have a better life, just like you talk about waking up. So
Bruce is going to be doing the closing keynote address at the conference, which will be a not to be missed event. And it's going to be something like the dangers of opening your beautiful heart, integration, and the dangers of spiritual bypassing, something like that.
I think that's it, Stephen. You got it.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a big title.
For anybody who might be watching this live right now or in the next few days or this week, if you're interested in coming to the conference, I strongly suggest and urge, and it's not a sales tactic or anything of that nature, but we're close to being sold out. So for those who want to be part of it, then now's the time to jump on and reserve your seat, because this resurgence is just amazing. The conference has doubled this year in size, and it's really quite exciting. And I have a couple of ideas, because if we sell out this week, then I might have a plan for something else, but I don't know.
Nice.
I just love sharing the message, but I just want to people to know that, now's the time if you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Limited.
So what we've seen, by the way, Bruce, is that the more people share the link, the more it gets spread around, obviously. So if you can share it with appropriate networks, that will help, and we will, of course, and hopefully, 1,000 or 2 or more people will see this valuable, important information.
And for those watching, please do share as well. If you feel that there's a valuable message that you want to share with your friends, your community, or someone specific, please, share this video. And there's a number of other of our interviews as well with the speakers up on spiritplantmedicine.com as well. We've done a few interviews with some great folks, and we're posting them as we do that. So
we'll be speaking to the legendary Wade Davis tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Pacific as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, thank you to both of you for your work and your great leadership in the field. And it's an honor to be in conversation with you. And thanks for this opportunity. And thanks for taking your Sunday afternoon to be in this convetion.
Hey,
now I'm going down the road to buy our turkey for tomorrow's dinner.
Great.
We did that yesterday, so I'm working. I'm back to work.
All right. Take care.
Thank you very much, guys.
Take care.
Enjoy your weekend. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye
now.